Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, welcome back to the podcast and thank you for tuning into this solo episode. At this moment in time, I've titled the episode 4 Nutrition Hacks You Haven't Heard Before. And I'm going to cover 4 concepts that I don't hear discussed very often, which I think can be really empowering on your own personal nutrition journey. And the first concept is the following. When you're eating, taste follows the law of diminishing returns, but caloric intake or caloric content does not. What I mean by that is that if you've ever eaten anything mindfully, you might have realized that the first bite you take is the tastiest. Usually because you're hungry and you're really looking forward to the food that you're going to have because you enjoy it. And then after that, every bite you take is slightly less tasty until, in many cases, you're really only eating because the food is still on your plate, unless you're very, very attuned to your own needs and you stop eating when you're satisfied and you no longer eat after that. On the other hand, the caloric content of every single bite stays exactly the same. If the first bite is 50 calories, the last bite is also 50 calories. I think this is a really valuable concept to understand and embrace because it helps you make more informed decisions about whether taking another bite is worth it to you or not. And it encourages you to practice more mindful eating, to become aware of the fact that the pleasure you get from every bite is decreasing. For example, let's say you decided to eat a cookie, and maybe the first bite is incredible, but then you get halfway through the cookie, and let's say the cookie is 300 calories, so you've already eaten 150, and those were super worth it. You're like, man, best 150 calories that I could have had today. But then you check in with yourself and you realize that you really just don't want the cookie all that much anymore because you satisfied that particular craving you had and you're ready to move on, but it's still in your hands, so your go-to reaction would be to continue eating it. And instead, you choose not to. Now, you saved 150 calories that could have not fit into your calorie target for the day, and you've actually done so by listening to your body. So you're not depriving yourself, you're doing the opposite. You're empowering yourself because you are truly paying attention to what your body is telling you, and therefore you're learning to build trust with yourself and with your ability to respond to these cues appropriately, which I think is an incredible power to develop, especially in our obesogenic environment nowadays, where we get bombarded with pictures of food and food advertisements and messages around how easy food is to order and eat at the drop of a hat. And all of these aspects make it much harder to be able to tune into what our body truly wants. And it's the reason why so many people are overweight or have obesity. Now, an objection you may make or may have that a client of mine actually proposed to me just in a check-in we had today is that the first bite tastes just as good as the last one. And I have an explanation for that, and this is a good segue into my second concept or hack, which is that eating slowly empowers you more than you might understand. And I say that because eating slowly isn't a new concept. A lot of people talk about it, But I also think that it's very underrated because perhaps it's not very clear how powerful it can really be. And first, I'm going to explain why I am going to respond with this concept to the objection that my client made. When they said to me that every bite tastes exactly the same, in the same sentence, they also told me that they could eat a meal in less than 10 minutes. And so my response was, it makes sense that your first bite would taste exactly the same because you haven't given your body enough time to process that you have food in your stomach. So when we eat food, as our stomach fills up, it stretches. And there are stretch receptors in the stomach that sense when the stretch is enough, that it means we've eaten enough to experience physical satiety. At that point, the stretch receptors send a signal to the brain to tell the brain, hey, we don't need any more food because the stomach is as stretched as we needed it to be, so please make us stop eating. Now, from research, it seems that that takes around 15 to 20 minutes. So if you're not giving yourself that amount of time to perceive that you are at least physically satiated, because you can be physically satiated but still have not consumed enough calories. So that's why it's important for me to make that distinction. So if you don't give yourself that time, it makes sense that you wouldn't be able to, for one, really even process what that food tastes like because you're eating it so fast. But you also wouldn't be able to process that you're at least physically satiated. So the brain isn't yet sending any signal to stop eating. And potentially one of those signals is translates into the food tasting less and less appetizing to encourage you to gradually stop eating. And that's one reason why I believe that eating more slowly can be really powerful, because as a result of giving yourself the time, it's much easier to tell when you're satisfied and to be able to stop instead of overeating and then regret that you've overeaten. Therefore, it can truly help reduce overeating episodes, not necessarily binge eating disorder related episodes, because eating disorders are also related to psychology. And that's why you need an eating disorder specialist team, which usually includes a psychologist or a psychiatrist or some sort of expert in the matter of psychology specifically. I'm also especially biased towards the importance of eating more slowly because I've experienced the benefits firsthand. I grew up, as you might know if you've listened to podcasts about my story, overweight. And certainly one of the contributing factors to that was that I could, I kid you not, eat a complete meal in 5 minutes or less. And we're talking, I could have my main, and then I could have a side, and I could have a dessert in 5 minutes or less. And the only reason why it didn't happen very often was that my mother would slow me down because we would only move to the next course once everybody was done with the first one. And I remember distinctly, looking back, that I wasn't very good at telling apart the different flavors within the same dish. And also, I've realized later on, reflecting on it, and much of this realization has actually come in the last couple of years, so it's been a really recent discovery for me, that I don't even really know what I like and what I don't like. And one contributing factor is, admittedly, certainly my eating disorder past, because for many years I didn't eat according to hunger, satiety, or preference. I was eating based on whether that was a food on my list of acceptable foods or not. But when I was growing up, before the eating disorder developed, I also suspect that I didn't really understand my food preferences because I was eating so fast, I couldn't really tell flavors apart. In addition to that, I don't have the strongest and most developed sense of smell, and I don't know very much about this, but I know that smell and taste are related. So if I have a weaker sense of smell and I'm also not eating very mindfully, it would make sense that I'm not really aware of what tastes good to me. And that's also how I explain the fact that I was overeating. Because what I chose to overeat were really high calorie, highly palatable foods. And I think that perhaps if I had been able to slow down and understand when I'd had enough of those foods, I might have been able to prevent the development of excess body fat. Because my mother was really interested in nutrition and particularly the benefits of nutrition on general health. So I was privileged to grow up with a very health promoting diet, which was also diverse. So she did give me and my brothers, that is, chocolate and sweets and French fries, as well as salads and pasta and other lower calorie foods. But I think that I abused the highly palatable foods because they simply gave me a stronger sense of satisfaction because I wasn't getting a lot of satisfaction from eating to begin with. And I also abused portions in general because I felt like I needed a bigger portion to feel satisfied because I simply wasn't paying much attention to what I was eating to begin with. So I needed a greater amount to feel as satisfied as I might have felt from a smaller amount. So that's why I am a big proponent of eating more slowly. Now, I also have an alternative because not everybody enjoys eating slowly. I have trained myself to eat more slowly, and I'll cover that in a moment. But some people don't want to do it or don't even like to do it. So, in that case, my advice would be the goal here is to give your body the time to perceive physical satiety, the stretch in your stomach. And it takes 15 to 20 minutes. So, if you're going to eat your meal in 5 minutes, before you choose to eat anything else, set a timer that runs out in 15 minutes' time, and only when the timer runs out do you decide whether you want to eat any more. Clearly, it's not the same as eating slowly to begin with, because if you eat slowly to begin with, you can also choose to stop a meal halfway through, or three quarters of the way through, or whatever it may be. But it's still a suitable workaround because let's say that after the 15 minutes, after when the alarm goes off, you realize that you haven't eaten enough, you can add a little bit more. If vice versa, you realize you've eaten too much, unless it's the last meal of the day that you're going to have, you can always say, you know what? I'm not going to have the snack that I was going to have, or I'm going to have a smaller dinner because I've eaten a little bit too much. And if it is the last meal of the day, and you're able to tune into your body's needs the next day, you may find that you naturally eat a little bit less here and there. So it's not potentially as useful to make decisions in the moment, but it can still help you avoid overeating, assuming that in assuming that the meal you're eating in those 5 minutes before you set your alarm is a reasonably portioned meal for you. Because of course, if you're pulverizing 5,000 calories, you can set all of the timers that you want. You'll still have overeaten at the end of the day. But I don't believe that I needed to tell you that. I just wanted to make a little joke. Anyway, now I want to conclude this part talking about the second hack by giving you a few tips that have helped me in the past when I was training myself to eat a little bit more slowly. So first, I did set an alarm. And in the beginning, thinking about taking 20 minutes to eat a meal felt like a long time. I wasn't really enthused about it. So what I did was I started with a 10-minute timer. So I halved the time. And then as I got more and more used to eating within a 10-minute window, I moved it to 15. And then eventually moved it to 20. And then I took away the timer because I didn't need it anymore. In addition to that, when I realized that I was already halfway through the meal and I still had 8 minutes to go, what I would do is I would take something to help me pass the time while I was eating. So, for instance, I would get a book and I would read a page and then I would take a bite. And then I would really take care to chew thoroughly, to turn my food into mush, which also helps digestion, by the way, to swallow it, put my cutlery down, pick up the book or Kindle, read a page, and then move on to the next bite. So essentially, I was entertaining myself at the same time as I was eating to make time pass until I was actually able to slow down on my own without the need for an extra aid, so to speak. And it took me some time because, as I said, I had this habit of eating very fast growing up. So, of course, it wasn't going to take a day to overcome it. But now I haven't used a timer in forever, and it takes me between 15 minutes and half an hour to eat a meal, depending on the size of the meal and how much I want to enjoy it. Sometimes I like to slow down more than usual on purpose. So if I can be a recovered fast eater, dear listener, so can you. The third hack I want to talk about is the importance of having a default diet. And as I start talking about this, I want to give credit where it's due. I learned the term default diet from Dr. Eric Helms, who has been on the podcast several times now. He is also the Chief Science Officer at 3DMJ, and they are a bodybuilding contest prep company, but they also train lifestyle lifters, so people who aren't competitors. And most recently, I've signed up for a lifelong membership to the 3DMJ Vault, which is an education hub that they have, where they have a lot of video courses. And Eric has also talked about the default diet on many podcasts, and I'm a bit of a stalker. I love Eric, so I listen to pretty much every podcast appearance that he makes. So I'd heard about it for a long time, but only when I got this lifelong membership was I able to take the actual course that he created about this diet. So I wanted to give Eric the credit he deserves for creating a wonderful course, but I won't be repeating what I learned from the course verbatim, because the default diet, the way Eric explains it in that course, is mainly geared towards bodybuilding competitors. So I made the principles that I got out of that course my own and adapted them to my own client base, which is comprised mainly of people like you, dear listener, who have a job, they enjoy lifting, they want to get a little bit healthier, drop some fat, build some muscle, but they don't necessarily compete in bodybuilding. And the default diet is a way of setting up your diet in order to accomplish structured flexibility so that you can make any food-related situation fit your current goals without depending on a meal plan and without depending on tracking your calories and macros. In order to create your own default diet, I believe it can be helpful in most cases to gain an understanding of your nutrient and calorie needs by tracking your calories and macros first. Some people are already very good at knowing intuitively how much they need to eat in order to at least maintain their weight. So they may not need to track at all if their only goal was to maintain their weight as it is right now and stay healthy, although they may choose to track if their goal was to gain muscle by gaining weight or to lose body fat, or they may choose to track for a few weeks, even if their goal was maintenance, just to ensure that they're getting enough protein and enough fiber. Because something that I've personally observed is that even when somebody is really naturally attuned with their body and they know when to stop eating to maintain their body fat where it is, they often are under eating on protein. Wherever you fall on this spectrum, whether you're more attuned with your body or less, a period of tracking to gain an understanding of nutrient and calorie needs can be very beneficial to gain the knowledge you need to create your default diet. Once you've gained that understanding, you can create the diet following these steps. First of all, you decide how many meals and snacks you want to have every day. And what works best for the average person, in my experience, is 3 to 6 eating occasions per day. So it could be only the 3 main meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or 3 meals and 1 snack, 3 meals and 2 snacks, 3 meals and 3 snacks, whatever works for you and your lifestyle. The second step is to consider the composition of each meal. And when I say meal, I mean a larger meal, not a smaller snack. And this is going to be goal dependent, and the portions are going to be dependent on your total calorie and protein needs at the time. But this type of dietary scaffolding can apply to any season of your life, whether you're trying to lose fat, build muscle by gaining weight, or keeping your weight stable. What's going to change is the food sources that you need and the portion sizes. And I'm going to give you an example of a very basic meal composition that might be what you choose to adopt, or it might be a little bit different depending on the dietary pattern that you follow. And this basic meal composition is you're going to have one source of protein, one starch, meaning a carbohydrate source that is typically higher in calories than fruit and vegetables, and that has more digestible components and a lower percentage of water per portion size. For example, a potato, rice, bread, pasta, couscous, and so on. Then you're going to have a source of dietary fat, or the dietary fat could be included within the protein source or the starch. And then you're going to have a portion of fruit and/or vegetables. And this is when your dietary pattern, as well as caloric intake at the time, is going to play an important role. Because if you are losing body fat and you don't have a large caloric budget, you may get to a point in your diet where at least some of your meals, if not all of them, depending on how large your deficit is or how low your calories are, only contain fats that come from your starches and/or your protein source. So instead of having a separate dietary fat source, it's going to be included within your protein, like you're having salmon, so you get the health promoting omega-3s within the fish, but you're not adding a teaspoon of olive oil because it would be too many calories in that case. Or if you are a vegan, often vegan protein sources also contain a certain amount of carbs and/or dietary fat. So you may not have dietary fat separately, or you may not have a starch separately if you are, again, for example, in a fat loss phase. Once you've nailed down the composition of your average meals, you want to consider the composition of your average snack. And again, this is goal dependent, dietary pattern dependent, and portion sizes dependent. In general, if I were to use goals to give you different examples, if you had purely bodybuilding goals, then the vast majority of your snacks are going to be made up of protein alone, protein plus fruit or veg, or sometimes protein plus carbs. Whereas if you were an endurance runner, you might have a combination of protein plus carbs, or even only carbs if you were to be fueling up for an endurance workout. Finally, and this can only happen as you gain more experience with different caloric budgets, assuming you're interested in going into a deficit and then going into a surplus and then staying at maintenance calories every now and again, because you're interested in the process of developing your physique by going through phases where you gain weight, phases where you lose body fat, and phases where you stay stable. Assuming that is an interest of yours right now, then the final step is to understand how this default diet changes depending on your caloric budget at the time. So sometimes, as I was saying, you may remove one of the meal components from the meal if you're in a calorie deficit, or you may change it to a lower calorie component. So for example, instead of having a starch, you might have double the amount of veg because veg are lower in calories. Or conversely, if you need more calories, then maybe instead of having that portion of veg, you're going to have half the portion of veg and then a bigger portion of the starch. Conversely, if your goal is to be in a calorie surplus, maybe you have a single portion of the veg, but you have 2 portions of the same starch. So the more you gain experience with different nutritional phases, the more fine-tuned your own default diet is going to be. And the ultimate goal, again, is to be able to apply it wherever you go, whatever you're doing, whether you choose to track your calories and macros or whether you choose not to track them. And what you can accomplish with this default diet is the ability to be flexible, which is important for you to live your life, and also the structure that you need in order to not only live your life, but also accomplish your fitness and health goals. Because as a result of applying the default diet and the structure, you're going to train your body to feel hungry a certain number of times per day because you're always eating the same amount of times per day. And if you can pair that with eating it around the same time, you also get the benefit of training your body to feel hungry at specific times, which then in turn helps regulate your circadian rhythms, which are 24-hour rhythms that run our physiological processes. Therefore, the more attuned to them you are, the better you perform and the better you feel and the healthier you are. And it's also much easier to learn, understand, and eat in accordance to your hunger and fullness cues, because those are based on circadian rhythms as well. So you don't just get the benefit of controlling your caloric intake, and this is why you can more easily accomplish your goals. You also get a truly important benefit that I believe is also underrated, since we're often talking about controlling our physique by tracking calories and macros, and that is the ability of learning to listen to your body and eat in an informed way, but also in a more intuitive way, where you listen to, or where you base your decision, whereby you base your decisions on qualitative data, like your hunger and fullness cues, not only on quantitative data, like the numbers in an app. If you allow me to go on a little bit of a tangent on this, some people may tell you that intuitively eating is the best approach to nutrition, whereas tracking your calories and macros is subpar. Other people might tell you that the only way to accomplish your physique goals is to track your calories and macros. I don't necessarily agree with either extreme. With regards to eating intuitively, because of the obesogenic environment we live in, it is admittedly very hard to do. That's why most people don't do it, and that's why I have to coach people through it. That's why you're listening to this podcast right now. But it's also true that you can get better at it. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother coaching people through it if you couldn't. And that it's not necessary to rely on calories and macros as a crutch. So I believe the truth is somewhere in the middle, where yes, tracking your calories and macros can be really helpful to learn more about food, not only in general, but in terms of how much and which foods you actually need on a regular basis to accomplish a goal. And it can help you create these default diets. But then, in my view, you want to marry these default diets with either eating without tracking or with tracking. Because if you have this underlying structure, then you gain the ability to accomplish your goals whether you track or you eat more intuitively without the aid of a tracking app. The final concept that I want to end this podcast on is going to be particularly helpful to you if you're going through fat loss right now. Because I've been having this conversation in particular with fat loss clients in quite a few check-ins over the last few weeks. And it's a reframe around how maintenance is a form of progress that too often is underrated. And I've been having the conversation in quite a few check-ins, I believe purely because of the time of year. Because at the end of November, throughout December, many people are gearing up for the holidays. So work gets really busy because people are going to take time off. But also your personal life may get very busy because you may be organizing a Christmas party or several Christmas parties or something of that nature. And what's really important to remember is that when you set yourself targets and you're achieving them on a regular basis, what that means is that your current targets are optimized, so to speak, for the circumstances at hand. If your circumstances get overhauled, clearly those targets are no longer as appropriate, so it would make sense if you started to struggle. If you have a coach, in this case, my clients have me, what I do is I adjust the targets based on the situation at hand when we know that it's a short term problem. Because clearly, if you were to be more long term, and it doesn't have to do with, in this case, the holidays, what we would need to work on is better habits. But when we know that it's a short term, crazy work situation, for example, that's going to last a few weeks, I believe that the following reframe is super helpful. You may be struggling with frustration. Before this crazy period came up, you were used to hitting your deficit calories, you were getting better and better at hitting your macros too, you were sticking to your training program, everything was going at a good pace. Now, since this crazy time started, you've struggled a lot more. Maybe you've missed one more workout than you would have wanted to. Maybe you've had a few days where you couldn't stick to your calorie targets, or you didn't hit your macros. And for all of these reasons combined, now instead of being in a deficit, you've been at maintenance, so your weight is stable. Understandably, you feel frustrated because your real goal is fat loss. But this is when it can be very powerful to compare yourself to previous years, not to a few weeks ago when fat loss was a lot easier. Because most people's baseline habits, when the proverbial shit hits the fan, result in a sedentary lifestyle and excess fat gain. So if you've been working on your fitness habits and now your shit hits the fan baseline keeps you at a stable weight, that's a huge form of progress that is too often underrated. Because a lot of people can complete a diet and lose fat. But most people's problem is that they put the weight back on. And if you ask them what happens, they usually tell you, and I know because I have these conversations on a regular basis with prospective clients, they will tell you that it tends to happen when they get particularly stressed. And that's when they revert back to old habits that they haven't fully conquered yet, like stress eating, stress drinking, eating out of takeaways, out of convenience, and so on and so forth. Changing this pattern so that your new I'm stressed response is to actually maintain the body weight that you've achieved is incredible progress to be proud of. In conclusion, yes, what you're doing right now by trying your best to focus on your fat loss goals isn't yielding fat loss, it's yielding maintenance. But if you weren't doing this, you would have been doing what you were doing in the past when you weren't losing fat and your weight wasn't stable either, like all these people I've just talked about that complete a fat loss diet and then put the weight back on. So this is still progress, and it's very important that you bear that in mind. And on that note, that's a wrap for today's podcast. As a recap, the 4 underrated hacks that you might not have heard about before are: number 1, the law of diminishing returns applies to taste but not calories. Number 2, eating slowly is empowering. Number 3, the default diet enables you to have structured flexibility to accomplish your goals, whether you choose to track or to take a more untracked approach to your nutrition. Number 4, staying stable during a short-term phase of high stress is an underrated form of progress. As always, thank you so much for listening. If you want to work with me, I'm still taking on clients. There is still time to kickstart your progress so that you lay the foundations for 2025, and you can apply via the link in the description. And if you can take the time to leave a 5-star review or a simple rating on whatever platform you listen on, that helps boost the podcast and helps me reach more people and get more guests to get an interest in my platform. Once again, thank you for your time and attention, and I will talk to you next week. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.